story too. He said he was protecting me. Margot Reyes was 36 when she moved to the property on Aldermore Road in northern Vermont. She was a freelance science writer, the kind of person who spent her days translating difficult research into clear language. Someone whose entire professional identity was built around evidence and precision and not accepting a claim without proof. She had moved to the city at 22 and spent 14 years in Boston. Good years, mostly. But by 35, she had accumulated enough fatigue with the noise and the pace and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by millions of people that she did something that surprised everyone who knew her. She bought 5 acres of land in Essex County, Vermont, a converted barn house, a gravel road that turned to dirt a mile from her driveway. The nearest grocery store was 35 minutes away. She told her friends she needed to think more clearly, that the city was interfering with her work. What she didn't say, what she barely admitted to herself, was that she was tired of being afraid. Tired of checking over her shoulder in parking garages, of holding her keys between her fingers at night, of the low, constant vigilance that comes with being a woman alone in a city. She thought the woods would feel safer, open, honest, nothing hiding in plain sight. She was right about the woods. She was wrong about what was already in them. Her nearest neighbor was a man named Gerald Foss, who lived in a small cabin a quarter-mile east through the trees. He was in his late 50s, had been on his property for over 2 decades, and came to introduce himself in Margot's first week with a jar of local honey and an apology for not coming sooner. He was soft-spoken, gentle-seeming. He had the quiet manner of someone who had chosen solitude not out of misanthropy, but out of some private grief that had simply never fully healed. Margot felt an instinctive protectiveness toward him. She thought, here is a man who has been alone too long. She thought, I'll be kind to him. She thinks about that now, with something she describes as a complicated feeling. The first sign was so small that Margot almost didn't register it. Almost. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, about 5 weeks after she moved in. Gerald had stopped by that afternoon for one of his weekly check-ins. 15 minutes on the porch, pleasant conversation, nothing remarkable. As he was leaving, he turned and said casually, "You've been working late this week. I can see the light on past midnight from my place." Margot said yes, deadline, and he nodded and left. She was halfway through making dinner when she stopped. Her office was at the back of the house. The window faced east, directly toward Gerald's property. For the glow from that window to be visible from his cabin, he would need a direct line of sight, through a quarter-mile of trees, which meant he wasn't seeing it from his cabin. He was seeing it from somewhere in the dark between their 2 properties, in the middle of the night. Margot stood in her kitchen and went through every alternative explanation she could construct. She is a scientist by training. She is very good at generating alternative hypotheses. She spent 20 minutes on it. None of them were satisfying. She told herself she was overreacting. She made her dinner. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time before she slept. 2 weeks later, Gerald mentioned a car. He described it in specific detail. A dark blue Honda, 4 or 5 years old. Out-of-state plates, had come down her driveway in the late afternoon 3 days prior and turned around. He said, "I just want you to know, I keep an eye on who comes to your property. Out here, you have to watch out for each other." Margot hadn't told him about that car. She hadn't told anyone. She had seen it herself and assumed it was a wrong turn. There was no way Gerald could know about it unless he had been watching her driveway. She thanked him. She kept her voice neutral. She closed the door and stood in her hallway and felt the particular cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding. She set up cameras. A scientist's response. Gather data. She installed 2 motion-activated cameras, one in the hallway covering the front of the property, and one angled out the back window toward the eastern tree line. She told no one. She waited. For 11 days, the cameras recorded nothing unusual. Margot began to feel foolish. She began the familiar internal negotiation. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe her isolation was distorting her perception. Maybe Gerald was genuinely just a harmless old man with poor social calibration. On day 12, at 3:08 a.m., the back camera triggered. Margot watched the footage the next morning with her coffee going cold beside her. The camera showed the eastern tree line in night vision green. The tree line was dark and still, and moving along it, parallel to the house, at a distance of about 40 feet, a flashlight, moving slowly, deliberately, the way someone moves when they are trying not to make noise. The light traveled the full length of the northern wall, paused at the corner, continued along the eastern wall, the wall with her office window, and stopped directly outside it. The timestamp showed it remained stationary there for 9 minutes. 9 minutes outside her office window at 3 a.m. Then it moved back into the trees and disappeared. Margot sent the footage to 3 colleagues the same day. She gave no context. She asked them simply to tell her what they saw. All 3 described a flashlight moving along the exterior of a house at night. One of them, a former crime reporter named Diane, called her afterward. Margot could hear the carefully controlled concern in her voice. Diane said, "Where are you? Are you safe right now? Because that footage is of someone conducting surveillance on your home." Margot called Gerald the next morning. She was direct. She had the footage. She had the timestamp. She was not asking for an explanation, she was demanding one. There was a long silence on his end of the line. Then he said, very quietly, "That was me. I do a perimeter check most nights. I should have told you from the beginning. I'm truly sorry I frightened you." A perimeter check of her house every night for months. Margot told him clearly and without room for misinterpretation. This was not acceptable. He was not to come onto her property at night under any circumstances, and if it happened again, she would file a police report. Gerald was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Not defensive, not angry, but carrying the weight of something he had been carrying for a very long time. He said, "Margot, I understand why you're angry. I do. But I need you to hear me. I have been on this land for 23 years. And for 23 years, there has been something in the eastern woods, on the ridge between our properties, that I cannot explain and that I have never been able to make go away. It is drawn to light and to the presence of people who are alone. Every person who has lived in your house before you has left within a year. I have watched it happen over and over. The ones who stayed longest were the ones I watched over. I am not trying to frighten you. I am trying to keep you here." Margot is a science writer. She told me her first response was clinical. She cataloged the statement as the testimony of a man with untreated paranoid ideation. She began constructing the most compassionate way to end the call and contact Adult Protective Services. And then he said, "The woman before you, her name was Susan Alcott. She moved in 2019. She lasted 7 months. The last 2 weeks before she left, she told me she could hear something outside her window at night. Something that she said wasn't quite right. Not wrong enough to be sure of, but not right enough to ignore. She described it as something that had learned to sound like the woods, but hadn't quite gotten it right yet." Margot's grip on the phone tightened, because she had heard something outside her office window in the past month. She had assumed it was animals. She had not told anyone. She had not told Gerald. She asked him how he knew about the sound. He said, "Because they all describe it the same way." Margot stayed for 2 more months. Not because she wasn't frightened, she was, but because she refused to make decisions from a place of panic. She is that kind of person. She stayed, and she gathered data, and she built the most rational case she could, and when the case was complete, she moved. She told me the nights changed after she asked Gerald to stop his checks. He kept his word completely. The cameras confirmed it. He never came back. But something else changed. The quality of the darkness on the eastern side of the house. A feeling when she sat at her desk late at night that the window behind her had become something more than glass. That there was an attention on the other side of it. Focused. Patient. She never saw anything. She has no footage of anything anomalous. She has nothing she can show you and say, this is what was there. What she has is this. The sound Gerald described. The sound Susan Alcott described to him. The sound of something that had learned to imitate the woods but hadn't quite gotten it right. She heard it. Twice. Both times within 40 feet of her office window. Both times between 2 and 3 a.m. She described it to me, and I am going to repeat her exact words because I think precision matters here. She said, "It sounded like wind and leaves, but there was no wind. And the leaves, the way they moved, the rhythm was slightly wrong. Like something that had studied the sound for a very long time and was producing it from memory rather than from nature. Almost perfect. Not quite." Margot now lives in an apartment in Burlington, 14th floor. She left a message for Gerald the day she moved out, thanking him for his concern and wishing him well. He called back and said only, "Lock your door at night, not because of what's out here, just in general, it's a good habit." She asked him if he was going to be all right out there alone. He said, "I've been doing this for 23 years. It knows I'm here. We have an understanding." She asked what kind of understanding. He said, "The kind where we both pretend the other one isn't there. Most of the time." She didn't ask what he meant by most of the time. She told me later she thinks that was the right decision. Margot got out, but she left with something she couldn't pack in a box. A sound she heard twice in those woods. Something that had studied the forest for a very long time and was producing it from memory. Almost perfect. Not quite right. She hasn't gone back to the countryside since. Not even during the day. But here is what stays with me about Margot's story. Gerald had been on that land for 23 years. Running those perimeter checks, keeping something at bay. When Margot asked him to stop, he stopped. And whatever was in those woods came closer. Think about that alongside what Harlan said to Owen. 21 years, waiting for the right people. 2 neighbors, 2 rural properties. 2 men who had been living next to something they could not name for longer than most people stay in one place. What did they know that their neighbors didn't? In episode 3, you're going to meet Rachel. Rachel is still on her property. Her husband Tom is changing, and the markers Voss put along the fence line, they've crossed onto her side. I have her latest update. I have the audio from the window. And I have something she found in the ground that I am still trying to process. Subscribe. Episode 3 is coming. And when you hear what Rachel pulled out of the soil, you're going to understand why her dog never went near that fence line again. Keep the lights on.